Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Menon. Welcome to the RPA Vanguard channel. In this video, we are going to be working with the UiPath Integration Service for Microsoft Outlook 365. So let's get started. A few months ago, I had put out a few quick start videos on integration service, but as their name suggests, they were just quick starts and were meant to give the audience an overview of what they are capable of. So in this video, what we'll be doing is we'll set up a bare bones end-to-end pipeline that will start with using an integration service connection to the Microsoft Outlook 365 email inbox and end at an automation that will be triggered each time a new email hits this inbox. In a subsequent video, I may take this bare bones idea to build an integration service pipeline that is a bit more practical and a bit more closer to a real world application. I want to talk about the Orchestrator prerequisites a bit because setting these things up can help save needless headaches down the line. And if you're relatively new to this, then you may find this part of the video helpful. In the present state of the UiPath Integration Service, right, the arrangement we'll need to have in the Orchestrator will need to follow a few guidelines. So first, as usual is the case, you will need to set up a modern folder to deploy your automation that is going to work with this integration service connection, right? So here I am in my Orchestrator. This is the modern folder I have created. One of the things that you have to remember here is the account that you are going to be assigning, right, to this modern folder that you're creating. It will need to be a user account and not a robot service account in any manner, right? It has to be a user account, right? Now, if you do not set this up as a user account, what's going to happen is later down the line, you're going to run into this error. So here you can see that the error is stating that you can run only under an account with credentials defined, right? And there are none assigned to this folder, right? So please take a note of this in advance and make sure that you have a user account assigned to this, meaning it has to belong to a user with a proper automation cloud login and password, right? That's number one. And further, the other thing that you have to remember is the user account that you're going to be assigning to this folder will need to have an unattended bot license assigned, right? So if I go to edit on this user account, and if I click on robot setup, here you'll have to enable the unattended robot for this user account and then put in your machine's domain and a username and your password, right? And update the settings to this account, right? So what's going to happen in essence is you are creating a directly assigned template for this user, right? So if we go back to where we came from, if I go to my folder again, and if I go to machines, you will see that this template is directly assigned to this user, right? So you don't have to create a separate template, but what happens is that if you have a user here, that user will have a directly assigned template. Now, if I go in here and edit this machine, you will need to make sure that your production or unattended runtime is set to 1, right? You will have to assign a license to this user and to this unattended robot, right? So this is something that you have to remember. Now, as usual is the case, community users will need to be conscious of the fact that if your unattended runtime license is in use elsewhere, right? Then you will need to unassign it from wherever it's in use and then reassign it to the modern folder you'll be using for this project, right? So what I've done is I've unassigned all the runtimes in other folders and reassigned it to this particular folder here. Okay, now that we have covered the orchestrator side of things, let's see what we need to set up our integration service connection, right? First off, you need to get onto the integration services part of the automation cloud. Now, if you do not see integration services or if it has been disabled for any reason, right, then you will need to enable it. For that, you go to more and then you go to admin and then come to your default tenant or your present tenant. And then we drop down this arrow here. And here is the integration service. And if it has been disabled, then you enable it. Now, this assumes that you have access to admin capabilities on your automation cloud instance. And of course, I'm demonstrating this through the community edition of automation cloud, right? So once you enable the integration service, then you must be able to see the feature here, right? That's the first thing that you need to take care of. The second thing that you will need is an Outlook 365 civilian account. Now, what I mean by that is it's an account with an outlook.com or a hotmail.com domain, right? Usually those are the two domains that most people use. So that's what I mean by a civilian account. Now, this account will be used to create your integration service connection. And therefore, we'll be calling this as an integration service account. The next step for us will be to create a new integration service connection for Microsoft Outlook 365. I am on the integration services landing page. So to create a new connection, you can look for Microsoft Outlook 365 here, or you can start from going to the connections page, right? So I'm going to navigate over to connections. And here, to create a new connection, you will click the add connection button. And then you will look for Microsoft Outlook 365, right? Please choose Microsoft Outlook 365, not the legacy. So if you have not already signed in to your Microsoft Outlook account, you will be requested to log in, right? And you can use the account that you've selected for this purpose to log in. And once you log in and give your permission for UiPath to access this account, right, you should be redirected back to this page here. Now, I'm going to cancel this out because I've already done it. And the process is pretty straightforward, right? So once you set that up, you should be able to come back to this page here. So once you're back here, right, you will be able to see a connection entry for Microsoft Outlook 365 account, right? And the very first connection that you create will have its name set to the email address of your automation cloud account, right? Now, why am I drawing your attention to this? The reason I'm doing that is please do not change the name of this connection. In my experience of testing this, right, I changed the connection name here, and I was able to create my automation, and I was able to access this connection with a pretty name in my UiPath automation. But ultimately, in the end, it failed. When the trigger kicked in and the automation tried to execute and access my email, it failed. This is the error that you will see when finally your automation tries to get to your email that has been received in your Outlook 365 inbox, right? You can see that it will say the connection is invalid. So I do not know what the reason is, but if you change your connection name, this is the result. So please do not change your connection name. Now, let us say you create another connection to Microsoft Outlook 365, right? The name of that connection will be the present date and time, right? At which time you have created that connection. Again, please do not change the name of that connection. Right? Now, the last thing that remains before we leave the screen is to test the connection to make sure it is working, right? So to test this connection, all you need to do is just hit the ellipsis here and then hit check connection. Everything seems to be working. So at this point, you have set up your connection correctly. The next thing that we are going to be creating is the automation that's going to work with your integration service connection, right? So your integration service connection to Microsoft Outlook 365 is the start of the pipeline. The automation that is triggered by this integration service connection is the end of your pipeline, kind of, right? So before we start building the automation, what we'll need to do is to come to this URL here. This is the documentation for integration service triggers, and you'll have to pick up these 4 variables from this page, right? And they are listed here for you to readily pick up. And you pick these up, and all of them are string variables, right? There's nothing fantastic about them except the fact that you have to keep their names the way you see them here, because it will become clear when you build your integration service trigger. But for now, make sure that you have these 4 variables, right, copied, and you keep them handy in the very state that you see them here, right? They're case sensitive and they must be exact, right? Other than that, they're simple string variables, right? The next thing that you will need is an email account from where you can send emails, right, to the inbox that you have used to create the integration service account, right? So a few minutes ago in the previous section, we created the integration service connection, right? And it has an inbox because it's a outlook.com or a hotmail.com email account. You will need another email address from where you can send emails to that account, right? In this case, I would call this email account from where you are sending emails as the trusted account, right? Or a trusted client account, right? So keep that in mind, because we'll talk about this probably in a subsequent video. But please note that you have to have a trusted email account from where you will be sending emails to this integration service account, right? So once you have these, you can now move on to creating and deploying a simple automation. I'm here in Studio, and here is a simple project that I've created. And this is the automation that's going to be deployed to the automation cloud, to that modern folder that we saw initially. And I'm going to walk you through this because I assume that most of us are familiar with creating a project in UiPath Studio. And this project in specific is of type Windows, not Windows Legacy. And what I have done here is it's pretty simple. I first use the Outlook 365 application scope. And then when I click on the application scope, you have the ability to enable the integration service, right? And once you enable the integration service, you must see your integration service connectors drop down here. Rather, they are the names of the connectors, right? And this goes back to the fact that you should not be changing your connection names, because if you do change your connection names in the automation cloud, they will show up here with those fancy names. And then once you have selected your account, your connection, you set a reference object name to it, right? In this case, I've set it up as Exchange 365. You can set it up to any name if you want, as long as you're going to be referring to that name downstream, right? The next thing that you will be doing is you're going to pull in the get email by ID, right? Now, this is where you will be using those 4 variables that we picked up from the UiPath Integration Service trigger documentation, right? So what you will be doing is you will be clicking on the Arguments tab here, and you will be setting up those 4 variables as string argument types in the input direction, right? That's all you will need to do. So you have the event connector, the event, the object type, and the object ID. So by the name of this particular variable here, UiPath event object ID, right? You will see that it relates to this activity, get email by ID, right? Basically, what happens, as you will see when we create a trigger, is that each email that is received in your integration service account email inbox has a unique identifier. And that identifier is passed in to this automation from the trigger, right? So UiPath event object ID is the unique ID of that email message, right? And then by using the get email by ID activity, you're targeting that exact email that's been received at that point in time, right? And the input that you're going to provide to this activity is UiPath event object ID, right? And it is a string. And because you've set this up as a string here, you do not need any translations. And once you fetch that message, you will give it a reference. I have set this up as new reference. And then I have done a simple write here to write the output in the debug log. And the other is a log message to write this in the orchestrator logs. The contents of write and log are identical. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can access the properties of the new message object. So basically, your new message object is a representation of an email, and it has pretty much the straightforward properties like a new message from property, the new message subject, the new message body, and the new message date, the date received, right? Now, the focus must be on new message.from, right? The reason I'm saying that is because I told you that you will need a second account that you will treat as a trusted client account, right? In the future, you will be inspecting the value of the from account and then processing emails only if you have received them from a trusted account. Otherwise, what's going to happen is your integration trigger, each time it triggers when a new email is received, it's going to pass that to the automation, and your automation has to process every email, right? But you will need to apply some kind of a control, because then you do not want each and every email that hits that account to be processed by your automation, right? So please do keep that in mind for the future. The other item that you will have to focus on is the message body. Now, when I tested this, what happened is the email was received in HTML code, right? So the entire HTML of the email message showed up in the body, right? Now, we don't want to have all those HTML tags in the email. We need the clean text in the email. So what I did is, in the next step, I used a regular expression to sort of strip out the email body from of all the HTML tags, right? So I use this expression here, but since it's a bit difficult to look at this here in this editor, I'm going to show you the expression that I wrote in regexer. So here is my regexer instance, and this is the expression that I wrote. So essentially, if you look at this message, you can see that it has matched every HTML tag and every special symbol that's inside of your text, right? So what's going to happen is, once we match all of these HTML tags in the email, right, we'll be replacing them with a single blank space. So basically what's going to happen is your entire HTML email body that's looking like this will be stripped off all the HTML tags, anything that begins this way and closes this way, as you see here, and any of those special characters that you see here, right, will be stripped off from the text, right? So this is the expression I used, and it will be part of this test automation that I'm going to share with you. But you can see clearly that this is doing an acceptable job of identifying all the tags, right? So once I have that expression, what I have done here is I've used the regex replace method to replace anything that's matched by that expression with a replacement pattern. So basically my replacement pattern here, if you look at the variables, is a single space string, right? And my regex pattern is the pattern that I just showed you in regexa, right? So basically, this expression here is going to take your new message body, which is all HTML, and then apply your regular expression pattern, and then replace it with a single empty string, right? The last step will be to just log the message body to make sure that your regular expression is delivering results the way you want it to deliver, right? And that's pretty much all there is to this automation. It's a very simple, bare bones automation that will prove the concept of an end-to-end integration service pipeline with Microsoft Outlook 365, right? So the next step for you is to deploy this automation to your modern folder, right? And I'm not going to go into that detail because at this point in time, I expect that audience know how to package up an automation and deploy it to the automation cloud, right? So with that, what we are going to do is we are going to go back to the automation cloud and create the other piece of this pipeline, and that is the integration service trigger. So I'm back to the automation cloud, and I am in my Orchestrator instance, right? I'm in the folder that is hosting my automation. And if I go into the automation section, I have deployed a process using the automation package that I've uploaded to this folder, right? So the automation is ready to go. The other thing that I said previously is make sure that this folder has a user with an unattended robot assigned to that user and the runtime set to 1. Please take a note of this now, because we'll be looking at where that is going to be useful in the next step. The other thing is that your integration service connection will need to be set up as well. So with these two pieces in place, we can now hop back into integration service and begin the process of creating the trigger. So we are back to the connections page on the integration service part of Automation Cloud, right? And please do note the trigger you're going to be creating will be against the same connection that you have used in your automation, right? If you recall, I used this connection, right? The connection with this name in my automation code, right? So we will be creating a trigger against this connection, right? So I click on this connection here. So if you have not already created a trigger, right, the next step will be for you to click add trigger, right? And you're going to be selecting the connector, obviously, because you have started from the connections page and clicked on Outlook 365 connection. That will be pre-selected for you. The other thing to note is that the connection name is already populated here. Now, because you're going to be dealing with emails, right, you will have to select new email received. This is your event, right? This is the one that your trigger is going to look out for, right? So once you select that, your record for that event is going to be a message, right? And we saw that in our automation. We looked at that new message object from which we pulled out the various parts of that email, right? So once you have everything set up on the left, the next thing you got to do is to move to the right and configure the automation process that must be executed when your trigger kicks off, right? So you drop down this list and then you select your automation. And this is the automation that I deployed. And when I select this, now this is where all the setup that you created on the orchestrator side, right? Your modern folder, your user account, the unattended robot, and the unattended runtime license that you set up comes together, right? If you haven't set that up right, then this particular step here is going to be impacted. So your trigger is going to initiate the automation, right, from the modern folder where that automation has been deployed to. And if that modern folder doesn't have a runtime license assigned, then you're going to run into trouble at this point, right? So here you can see that 0 runtimes available, 0 connected, right? And because your automation is of type unattended, you got to select unattended. Now, when you do that, it's going to switch and it is going to show you the runtime license that's available and the runtime license to which your automation is connected to. Now, if you have not set that up correctly, then this is not going to change. Therefore, if you have run into trouble at this spot, please stop, because your trigger is going to kick off, but your automation is not going to run because your automation now does not have a runtime license, right? So please make sure that you go back to your orchestrator setup and fix all the issues and then come back to creating a trigger, right? And then here you can see the default input arguments your trigger is going to pass to your automation, right? And these are the very same 4 parameters that you passed in as arguments to your automation, right? They are all of type string. Now here the value says it's based on trigger execution. Now what that means is every time the trigger executes and it receives a new message, the values of that event and that message will be passed on to these parameters where they have to be applied, right? For example, this particular event connector parameter will have this value, right? And then the event will be the new email message received, right? That's the event. There will be actually an enumeration. It's called email underscore received. And that will be passed in to this particular parameter. And the third is the object type. Your object type is the message object, which is the record for this event. And the fourth is the object ID, right? Like I said, the unique ID of this object, right? Now, those 4 parameters are going to be populated by the trigger as soon as it receives a new email, and then it's going to trigger your automation, right? Therefore, if you have everything as you see here on the screen, most importantly, your runtime license and your runtime license connection assigned correctly, then go ahead and add the trigger, right? So I'm not going to do this because I have already done it and I already have a trigger operational. So I'm going to cancel out. But once you save this trigger, you will be back to this page here. And you should see your trigger on this page, right? Now, if you have multiple triggers, it's up to you to decide which trigger you have to activate and deactivate based on what they're meant for. So please do take a note of status. Now, in this case, I am testing one automation that is tied to this connection. So I have actually activated this trigger, right? The other thing that you might want to do when you are testing your pipeline from end to end, right, is to reduce the polling time. So if you go to connections here, if I click on this particular connection here, and once you come to that connection, you will see a check time, right? This is the polling time. Usually the default is 5 minutes, which is good because in a production environment, unless you require something much quicker than 5 minutes, you should not really be changing this value, but only in the interest of testing, what you would want to do is click on the time here and then change it to something custom, right? In this case, I've set up a custom time and I've assigned it to 1 minute. And once you have set up this time here, you can click update and check. So what's going to happen is the connection is going to go into your integration service inbox and check for new emails, right? So this is how you adjust your polling time between testing and production. Again, I'm recommending, please do change this back to a larger value once you have finished your testing, right? So this is the integration service account, the Microsoft Outlook 365 account that I've used to create the integration service. And I will be sending an email to this inbox, right? So I'm going to keep an eye on it here. And coming back to the automation cloud, I am on the page for this trigger. You can see the name of the trigger, the name of the connection / the name of the automation, right? And here we can see the history of the trigger kicking off when it receives a new email. Okay. So what we'll be doing now is we'll be keeping track of a new event that's going to show up here. And then once that new event shows up here, we are going to go into the automation logs, and we are going to see the automation running. What I'm going to be doing next is I will be sending an email from my mobile device, right, to this account here. So let's keep an eye on this inbox to make sure that the email shows up. Please do note, sometimes when you send an email for the first time, it might go into spam. So please do whitelist it so that you get emails. That's what happened to me the first time. But here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to hit send from my mobile device, and the email has been sent. And here it is. I just received this just now, right? And depending on how your inbox recognizes it, it can go into either focused or other. So that's a slight confusion there. And if I now switch back to the integration service and refresh this page, here it is. I am showing the timestamp. The email was received at 9:19 p.m. and the trigger kicked off at 9:20, and it says that the attempt was successful, right? Now you can go to the job logs from right from here, but I'm going to take the straight path. I'm going to go into the orchestrator, and I'm already on the modern folder, right? So I'm going to go into automations, jobs, and here it is. The automation successfully executed and completed about 2 minutes ago, which is seems to be right. Now I'm going to go into the logs. So here is the fact that an email has been received. And if I open this detail here, you can see that the email has been received as full HTML. So as we saw in the code review of the automation, the next step is for it to strip all the HTML tags. And if I click on this detail, so here you can see that it has stripped all the HTML tags and returned the clean text. So what you have seen in essence is an end-to-end demonstration of an integration service pipeline, right? Beginning from the fact that a user sends an email to your integration service email account, your integration service senses that it has received a new email, and then it kicks off the trigger. The trigger picks up all the information on the new email and passes it to the automation, and then triggers the automation. So if you want to see where those parameters, those 4 parameters are being passed to your automation, you can go back to jobs and come back to the job entry where your automation has just executed. And then you click here. You can see the input values that your trigger passed to your automation, right? And the first one is the event connector, which is your Microsoft Outlook 365. The second is the UiPath event. Like I said, it's an email underscore received enumeration for a new message received. Your object type is message, and this is the unique ID of that message, right? And this is the ID that's going to be used in your get email by ID activity, right? And that's pretty much it. That's how easy it is to set up a foundational bare bones integration service pipeline using the integration service for Microsoft Outlook 365. So that is all for this video. And if you liked the content and if you learned something new, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll truly appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.